Every night, this old man cried alone at exactly 8:17. But when a young delivery driver saw the photograph, he discovered a secret connected to his own father.
Every night at exactly 8:17 p.m., an old man sat alone on the same wooden bench beside the town's abandoned train station. He never spoke to anyone. He never asked for money. He never begged for food. He simply sat there and cried. The people of Bellwood had seen him so many times that they had stopped wondering why. Some thought he was lonely. Some thought he had lost his mind. Others simply walked past him. But one cold evening, a 27-year-old delivery driver named Daniel noticed something strange. The old man wasn't just crying. He was holding a small, worn-out photograph. And when Daniel looked closer, he saw his own family name written on the back. That night, Daniel decided to ask the old man one question. A question that would uncover a secret the entire town had forgotten for more than 40 years. And by the end of the week, the people of Bellwood would gather in the town square, not to laugh at the old man, not to pity him, but to honor him, because the truth about why he cried every night would shock everyone. Bellwood was a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone. There was one grocery store, one bakery, one gas station, one school, and an old train station that had been closed for almost 20 years. The station stood at the edge of town, surrounded by tall grass and forgotten memories. Most people avoided the place after sunset, but Daniel often passed by it during his evening delivery route. Daniel delivered food for a small restaurant in the center of Bellwood. He wasn't rich. He lived in a small apartment above an old mechanic's shop. He worked long hours, but Daniel had something his late mother had taught him when he was a child. Never walk past someone who needs kindness, she used to say. Daniel remembered those words every day. One evening, as he drove past the old station, he noticed the old man sitting on the bench. The same man, the same bench, the same tears. Daniel slowed his vehicle. He had seen the man before. His name was Elias. At least, that's what people called him. Nobody knew much about him. Some said he had moved to Bellwood years ago. Some said he had lived in the abandoned station for a while. Others claimed he had once been a successful businessman, but nobody really knew the truth. Daniel pulled his vehicle over. He looked at the clock. 8:17 p.m. Exactly the same time. Daniel stepped out. "Sir." The old man quickly wiped his eyes. "I'm Fine." Daniel gave him a gentle smile. "I didn't ask if you were fine." The old man looked at him. For the first time, Daniel saw his face clearly. His eyes were tired, not just from age. They were tired from carrying something heavy for a very long time. Daniel held out a paper bag. "I have an extra sandwich." The old man stared at it. "I don't need charity." Daniel nodded. "Good, because I'm not offering charity." The old man frowned. "Then what are you offering?" "Dinner." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the old man slowly accepted the bag. Daniel sat beside him. They ate in silence. And for the first time in years, Elias did not cry alone. After a few minutes, Daniel noticed the old photograph in Elias's hand. It was black and white. The corners were worn. The picture showed a group of people standing outside a small building. Daniel leaned slightly closer. Elias noticed. "You want to know what it is?" Daniel hesitated. "If you want to tell me." The old man stared at the picture. "This was taken a long time ago." "How long?" 43 years. Daniel looked at the photograph again. There were about 15 people in it. Men, women, children. And behind them stood a small wooden building. Daniel studied the faces. Then his eyes stopped. A young man stood in the back row. Daniel's heart skipped. He knew that face. It was his father. Daniel immediately sat upright. "Where did you get this?" Elias looked at him. "You know him. That's my father." The old man's expression changed. For the first time, the sadness in his face was replaced by shock. "Your father?" Daniel nodded. "My father was named Thomas Reed." Elias stared at the photograph. Then he looked back at Daniel. "Then you're his son?" Daniel felt a strange chill. "You knew my father?" Elias said nothing. Daniel studied his face. "Sir, how did you know my father?" The old man folded the photograph carefully. "Your father saved my life." Daniel was speechless. His father had died when Daniel was only 12 years old. He had never heard this story. "What do you mean?" Elias looked toward the abandoned train station. Your father was the kindest man I ever knew. Daniel swallowed. What happened? The old man looked down. That is why I come here every night. Daniel wanted answers, but Elias was silent. Finally, he said, why do you come here every night at 8:17? Elias closed his eyes. Because that was the time your father found me. Daniel felt his heart tighten. Found you? The old man nodded. 43 years ago, I was 17 years old. Daniel looked at him in surprise. You were 17? Yes. What happened? Elias stared into the darkness. I had run away from home. Why? Because I thought nobody wanted me. He explained that his father had died when he was young. His mother struggled to care for him. And one day, after a terrible argument, Elias left. He had no money, no food, no plan. He walked until he reached Bellwood. That night, he sat outside the train station. It was 8:17 p.m. He was hungry, cold, and completely alone. Then a young man approached him. That young man was Daniel's father, Thomas Reed. Thomas asked me if I needed help, Elias said. I told him to leave me alone. Daniel smiled sadly. That sounds like my father. Elias gave a faint smile. Yes. He didn't listen. Thomas had taken Elias to his home. He gave him food, a warm blanket, and a place to sleep. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, Thomas helped Elias find work. He spoke to a local carpenter. The carpenter agreed to give Elias a job. Thomas even helped him enroll in evening classes. For months, Thomas checked on him. He never asked for money. He never asked for anything in return. He simply helped. One day, Elias said, I asked your father why he was helping me. What did he say? Elias looked at Daniel. He said, because someone helped me once. Daniel frowned. Who? Elias slowly looked at the photograph. That is the part one never understood. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. His father had never talked about Elias. Not once. That night, Daniel went home and opened an old box of family belongings. Inside were old letters, photographs, and his father's personal notebook. Daniel had never read it before. He opened the notebook. Most of the pages were filled with simple notes. Bills, work schedules, grocery lists. But near the middle, Daniel found something unusual. A handwritten sentence. 8:17. Never forget the promise. Daniel stared at the words. His hands began to shake. What promise? Why 8:17? And what did it have to do with Elias? Daniel kept reading. Several pages had been torn out, but one sentence remained. Some people think kindness is about giving something away. They don't understand. Sometimes kindness is simply refusing to leave. Daniel sat silently for a long time. The next morning, he returned to the old station. Elias was there. Daniel held up the notebook. Why did my father write this? Elias looked at the page. His eyes filled with tears. He remembered. Remembered what? Elias took a deep breath. Your father wasn't the first person who saved someone at 8:17. Daniel stared at him. What does that mean? Elias reached into his coat and pulled out another photograph. This one was even older. The picture showed a young woman standing beside a little boy. The boy was about 6 years old. Daniel looked at the face. Then he froze. The woman was his grandmother, and the little boy was his father. Daniel slowly looked up. What is this? Elias said quietly. Your father was once the child who needed help. Elias explained that when Thomas was 6 years old, his family had fallen on difficult times. His father had lost his job. His mother was ill. They had very little money. One winter evening, Thomas had become separated from his mother near the train station. It was 8:17 p.m. A stranger found him crying alone. That stranger was an elderly woman named Margaret. She gave the little boy food. She took him to a warm place, and she stayed with him until his mother arrived. The woman didn't know that years later, Thomas would remember her kindness. She didn't know that Thomas would spend the rest of his life helping others. And she certainly didn't know that one day, Thomas would save a 17-year-old boy named Elias. Daniel stared at the photograph. So my father helped you because someone once helped him? Elias nodded. Your father told me that kindness should never stop with one person. Daniel looked down. What happened to the woman? Elias sighed. She died years ago. Did my father ever find her? Yes. Daniel's eyes widened. When? 3 years before he met me. Daniel suddenly remembered something. His father had once mentioned an elderly woman named Margaret, but Daniel had never known who she was. Elias continued, "Your father found her living alone in another town. He visited her every week." Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes. "He never told us. He didn't want praise." Elias looked at the old photograph. "That was your father's greatest weakness." Daniel smiled through his tears. "Why would that be a weakness?" "Because people should know when someone is good." Daniel still had one question. "If my father helped you so much, why did you disappear?" Elias looked away. "I didn't disappear." "Then why did you never contact him?" The old man remained silent. Finally, he answered, "Because I was ashamed." "Of what?" "I failed him." Daniel didn't understand. Elias explained that after Thomas helped him, he eventually moved to another city. He built a career. He got married. He had children. He became successful, but he never forgot Thomas. Then one day, Elias received terrible news. Thomas had been diagnosed with a serious illness. Elias wanted to return, but he was afraid. Afraid that Thomas would be disappointed in him. Afraid that too much time had passed. Afraid that he would arrive too late. "So I kept waiting," Elias said. "Waiting for what?" "For the right moment." Daniel's expression became sad. "There is no perfect time." "I know that now." Elias explained that by the time he finally returned to Bellwood, Thomas had already passed away. Daniel looked down. "When was that?" 20 years ago." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you come to the funeral?" Elias closed his eyes. "Because I couldn't face your family." He believed that Thomas had helped him become successful, but Elias had never returned the favor. He carried that guilt for decades. Every year, he came back to Bellwood. Every night, he sat on the same bench at 8:17 and cried, not because he wanted pity, but because he believed he had wasted the opportunity to say thank you. Daniel reached into his jacket. He had brought something, a small envelope. He had found it in his father's old notebook. He handed it to Elias. The old man stared at it. "What's this?" "I don't know." Elias slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Daniel watched as Elias began reading. His hands trembled. His lips moved silently. Then his eyes filled with tears. "What does it say?" Daniel asked. Elias couldn't speak. He handed the letter to Daniel. Daniel read it. It was written by his father. The letter said, "Elias, if you ever come back to Bellwood, please don't feel that you owe me anything. You were never a debt. You were never a favor. You were a person who needed help, and I was lucky enough to be there. If you ever wonder whether your life mattered, remember this. Every person you help becomes part of the kindness you once received. Don't look backward forever. Keep going. Thomas." Elias covered his face. For the first time, Daniel saw him completely break down. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your life mattered." Elias shook his head. "I never thanked him." Daniel gently replied, "Maybe you were supposed to thank him by continuing what he started." The old man looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel pointed toward the town. "How many people have you helped?" Elias looked away. "I don't know." Daniel had an idea, and that idea would change Bellwood forever. Daniel began asking questions. He talked to the baker, the mechanic, the school teacher, the shop owner, and slowly, he discovered something incredible. Elias had been helping people for years, quietly, without telling anyone. He had paid for a child's school books. He had repaired an elderly woman's broken fence. He had left groceries outside the homes of struggling families. He had bought medicine for a sick neighbor. He had helped young people find jobs. And every time someone tried to thank him, he refused. "Someone once helped me," he always said, but there was more, much more. Daniel discovered that Elias had helped dozens of people, and many of those people had gone on to help others. One woman Elias had helped was now a teacher. She had helped hundreds of children. A young man Elias had given a job to had later started a business. That business employed 20 people. A family Elias had supported during a difficult year later opened a community kitchen. Daniel began connecting the pieces. Elias had spent 43 years believing he had done nothing to repay Thomas. But the truth was, he had repaid him thousands of times. He simply never realized it. Daniel decided not to tell Elias what he was planning. He went to the town hall. He spoke to the mayor. Then he contacted the people Elias had helped. At first, nobody believed him. But when Daniel explained the truth, something incredible happened. People began coming forward, one by one. A teacher, a businessman, a mother, a retired nurse, a young man who had once been homeless. They all had the same story. Elias had helped them when nobody else would. And every single one of them remembered his words. Don't thank me. Help someone else one day. The people of Bellwood realized something. They had spent years looking at Elias as the lonely old man on the bench. But they had never truly seen him. They had seen his old clothes, his quiet behavior, his sadness, but they had never seen the kindness behind it. So the town decided to do something. They organized a gathering, not a ceremony, not a public award, something much more personal. They called it the 817 Promise. The next evening, Daniel asked Elias to meet him at the old train station. It was 8:17 p.m. Elias arrived as usual, but something was different. The station was no longer empty. There were people everywhere, hundreds of them, families, children, teachers, shop owners, people Elias recognized, and people he didn't. Elias stopped walking. What is this? Daniel stood beside the bench. Something you should have seen a long time ago. Elias looked around. A young woman stepped forward. Mr. Elias? The old man stared at her. You helped my mother when she was sick. Another person stepped forward. You gave me my first job. A woman holding a child's hand said, you paid for my daughter's school books. A man in a business suit said, you once gave me money when I had nothing. I used it to start my business. Elias shook his head. I don't remember all of you. The man smiled. That's the point. One by one, people told their stories. Elias had helped them. They had helped others. And those people had helped even more people. The kindness had continued. Like a small light passed from one person to another. Then Daniel stepped forward. He held the old photograph. My father once helped Elias. Daniel looked at the crowd. But my father didn't believe kindness was something you gave away. He looked at Elias. He believed kindness was something you passed on. The crowd became silent. Daniel handed Elias a small wooden box. Inside was a brass clock. The hands were permanently set at 8:17. Elias stared at it. What is this? Daniel smiled. A reminder. Of what? That one moment can change a life. But the biggest surprise had not happened yet. The mayor stepped forward. Elias, there's one more thing. Elias looked confused. The mayor handed him a document. It was a deed. Elias read it slowly. His eyes widened. The old train station had been purchased. The building would be restored, and it would become a community center, a place where people could receive food, find work, learn new skills, and receive help when they needed it. The name of the center would be the 817 House. Elias couldn't speak. Daniel placed his hand on his shoulder. You always said you wished you could have helped more people. Elias looked at the crowd. You did. The old man looked at the abandoned station. The place where he had once been a lonely 17-year-old boy. The place where Thomas had found him. The place where he had cried every night for decades. And now, it would become a place where people came to find hope. Elias sat down on the old bench. But this time, he wasn't crying from sadness. He was crying because he finally understood. He had never failed Thomas. He had been carrying Thomas's kindness all along. Months later, the 817 house opened. The old station was transformed. The walls were repaired. The windows were cleaned. The empty rooms became classrooms. The waiting area became a food center. A small library was built near the entrance. And on one wall, there was a simple wooden sign. It said, kindness is never wasted. Elias became the first volunteer. He greeted every person who walked through the doors. One afternoon, a young boy came inside. He looked nervous. He had no money, no family with him, and he was clearly afraid. Elias sat beside him. Are you hungry? The boy nodded. Elias smiled. Then let's start there. The boy looked at him. Why are you helping me? Elias paused. Then he smiled. Because someone once helped me. The boy asked. Do I have to pay you back? Elias shook his head. No. Then what should I do? Elias looked at the sign on the wall. Someday, when you see someone else who needs help. He gently tapped the boy's shoulder. Don't walk past them. The boy nodded. And just like that, the kindness continued. Years later, Daniel would sometimes visit the 817 house. Elias grew older. His hair became completely white. His steps became slower. But every evening at exactly 8:17, he would still sit on the old bench. Only now, he was never alone. Children sat beside him. Families visited him. People he had helped returned with their own families. And sometimes, strangers came in looking for help. Elias always welcomed them. One evening, Daniel found him sitting quietly. "Still here?" Daniel asked. Elias smiled. "Always." Daniel sat beside him. For a moment, they watched the sunset. Then Daniel asked, "Do you still miss my father?" Elias looked at the old clock. The hands showed 8:17. Every day, Daniel smiled sadly. "Do you still cry?" Elias thought about the question. Then he said, "Sometimes." "Why?" Elias looked toward the community center. "Because I remember the boy I used to be." Then he looked at Daniel. "And I cry because that boy survived long enough to help someone else." Daniel smiled. The old man reached into his pocket. He pulled out the original photograph. The photograph of Thomas. The photograph that had started everything. On the back, there was a new sentence. Daniel had written it years earlier. It said, "Kindness never ends with the person who gives it." Elias looked at the words. Then he handed the photograph to Daniel. "Your father was right." Daniel looked at him. "About what?" Elias smiled. "Some people think kindness is about giving something away." He looked toward the glowing lights of the 817 house. But kindness is really about making sure nobody has to face the darkness alone. And from that day forward, the people of Bellwood remembered one simple truth. Sometimes the person sitting alone and crying is not waiting for someone to save them. Sometimes they are waiting for someone to remind them that their life still matters. And sometimes one small act of kindness can travel through an entire town, across decades, through generations, and change more lives than anyone could ever imagine. So if you ever see someone sitting alone, don't assume they want to be left alone. Don't assume their story is over. Sometimes, all it takes is one question, one meal, one conversation, one person who refuses to walk away. Because you never know, you might not just be helping a stranger. You might be continuing a kindness that began long before you were born. And perhaps, 40 years from now, someone else will remember that you were the reason they didn't give up. If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything.